Mr. Rossi, please come home now. She's in the house, and God help us, she'll destroy her. The line went dead. Dominic Rossi's blood turned to ice. He left $3 million on the table, drew his Glock, and sprinted toward his car. His hidden world was collapsing. The air inside the abandoned warehouse by the Calumet River tasted of rust, stale rain, and impending violence. Dominic Rossi, the 34-year-old head of the Chicago outfit, sat at the head of a scarred aluminum table. Across from him sat Arthur O'Bannon, the city's primary distributor of illicit narcotics. They were negotiating the boundaries of the Southside shipping lanes, a conversation measured in millions of dollars and human lives. Dominic was a man who operated on absolute control. Every micro-expression, every tailored thread of his charcoal Brioni suit was meticulously curated to project impenetrable power. His underboss, Lorenzo Costa, stood quietly to his right, a silent sentinel in the dim, flickering light of the overhead halogens. The tension in the room was a living, breathing thing, thick enough to choke on. Then the burner phone in Dominic's breast pocket vibrated. It was a severe breach of protocol to leave a device powered on during a sit-down with a rival syndicate. Lorenzo's eyes darted toward Dominic, registering the anomaly. Dominic didn't move immediately. He knew the number of the phone. It was an encrypted satellite device, and only one person on the planet possessed the corresponding number, Maria Santos. Maria was not a soldier. She was not a lieutenant. She was the head housekeeper of Dominic's heavily fortified estate on Astor Street in the Gold Coast. She was a woman in her late 60s who had served the Rossi family since Dominic was a child, a woman who possessed a deep, grandmotherly warmth. More importantly, she was the sole caretaker of Dominic's greatest vulnerability. Dominic held O'Bannon's gaze, offering a cold, polite nod, and withdrew the phone. He pressed it to his ear. Speak. Mr. Rossi. Maria's voice was a ragged, breathless whisper. It wasn't the voice of a seasoned mob affiliate. It was the voice of a civilian staring into the abyss. Please come home now. Genevieve, she's in the house. A choked sob echoed through the receiver. And, God help us, she'll destroy her. The line went dead. Dominic's heart hit his ribs like a sledgehammer. The temperature in his veins plummeted to absolute zero. He didn't offer O'Bannon an apology or an explanation. He simply stood up, his chair scraping violently against the concrete floor. Lorenzo, handle this, Dominic barked, his voice devoid of its usual calculated smoothness. He was already moving toward the heavy steel doors, drawing his matte black Glock 19 from his shoulder holster. He burst into the torrential Chicago rain, sprinting toward his armored Audi RS7. The engine roared to life with a guttural growl, and within seconds, Dominic was tearing down Lakeshore Drive, pushing the vehicle past 120 miles per hour. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour as the city lights blurred into streaks of neon. Genevieve DuPont was the ruthless, sociopathic daughter of the Montreal Syndicate's ruling family. 2 years ago, their families had arranged a marriage to solidify a northern trafficking route. But Dominic had severed the engagement after witnessing Genevieve orchestrate the firebombing of a crowded nightclub simply because the owner had insulted her. She was a viper, a woman who operated without a moral compass, driven solely by ego and cruelty. When Dominic broke it off, Genevieve had sworn an oath of vengeance, promising to take the one thing Dominic valued most. But Genevieve wasn't supposed to know about Audrey. No one was supposed to know about Audrey. Audrey Gallagher was the antithesis of Dominic's dark, blood-soaked world. He had met her at the Art Institute of Chicago, a civilian art restorer with paint on her overalls and a laugh that had temporarily halted the rot in Dominic's soul. She was soft, compassionate, and entirely innocent. To protect her, Dominic had built a fortress of lies. He bought her an isolated gallery, married her in a private, unrecorded ceremony in a remote Tuscan village, and moved her into the Astor Street mansion. He surrounded her with ex-military private security, shielding her from the Chicago outfit and the ghosts of his past. Audrey believed Dominic was a high-stakes venture capitalist. She spent her days restoring Renaissance oil paintings and listening to jazz in the conservatory. If Genevieve had breached the Astor Street estate, she wasn't there to talk. She was there to execute a message. Maria's words echoed in his skull, bouncing off the walls of his panic. She'll destroy her. Dominic's hands gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned bone white. He swerved violently around a semi-truck, the Audi's tires hydroplaning for a terrifying second before the all-wheel drive caught the asphalt. He repeatedly hit the speed dial for his head of security, a former Navy SEAL named Wyatt. Voicemail. He called the gatehouse. Ringing, then silence. The perimeter had fallen. It was an inside job, or Genevieve had hired a ghost team. Dominic's chest tightened, a suffocating wave of dread washing over him. He pictured Audrey, barefoot, in her painting studio, completely unaware of the monsters that had just kicked down her door. He pictured Genevieve's cruel smile as she leveled a weapon at the woman who carried Dominic's unborn child, a secret Audrey had whispered to him just 3 nights ago. "Hold on, Audrey," Dominic whispered to the empty car, his foot pressing the accelerator flush against the floorboard. "Just hold on." The heavy iron gates of the Astor Street estate were supposed to withstand a vehicular ramming at 60 miles per hour. As Dominic's Audi fishtailed onto the private cobblestone driveway, he saw them standing wide open, the electronic locking mechanism cleanly bypassed. Dominic slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt near the Grandstone fountain. He didn't bother cutting the engine. He kicked the door open, the driving rain instantly soaking his suit. He brought his Glock up, his eyes scanning the manicured hedges and the imposing, multi-story limestone facade of his home. The silence was deafening. There were no sirens, no shouting. He moved with the lethal practice grace of a man who had survived a dozen assassination attempts. He found the first body near the portico. It was Wyatt. The massive ex-SEAL was slumped against a stone pillar. Dominic checked his pulse. It was faint, thready. A small, feathered dart protruded from the side of Wyatt's neck, carfentanil or some other heavy-grade tranquilizer. Genevieve hadn't come for a noisy shootout with the guards. She had come for a quiet, intimate execution. Dominic stepped over Wyatt and approached the massive oak front doors. They were slightly ajar. He pushed them open with his shoulder, the barrel of his weapon leading the way. He stepped into the grand foyer. The crystal chandelier cast a cold, fragmented light over the Italian marble floors. The scent of ozone, rain, and a cloying, expensive French perfume hung heavily in the air. Genevieve's perfume. "Audrey!" Dominic roared, abandoning all tactical silence. If Genevieve was going to kill him, let her try. He needed to draw the fire away from his wife. Only the echoes of his own voice answered him. He moved systematically through the ground floor. The formal living room was empty, the velvet furniture untouched. The library, with its floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, was dark and silent. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every creak of the old house sounded like a gunshot. He reached the long hallway leading to the back of the house, toward the conservatory and Audrey's painting studio. He saw a shadow trembling near the baseboard. Mr. Rossi. It was Maria. She was huddled in a small alcove beneath the main staircase, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked as though it had fractured her mind. Dominic knelt beside her, keeping his gun raised toward the hallway. "Maria, where is she? Where is Audrey?" Maria pointed a shaking finger down the corridor, toward the heavy double doors of the conservatory. In there, she whimpered, her teeth chattering. Genevieve brought 2 men, big men with guns. She kicked the door in. "I ran. I called you. Mr. Rossi. The things I heard in there. The blood." Dominic didn't wait for her to finish. He stood up, his vision tunneling. He had failed. He had brought his darkness into Audrey's light, and it had consumed her. A blinding, white-hot rage eclipsed his fear. He marched down the hallway, raised his boot, and kicked the heavy, brass-handled doors of the conservatory off their hinges. He burst into the room, sweeping his weapon left and right, his finger tightening on the trigger, fully prepared to empty the magazine into Genevieve Dupont's chest. But as his eyes adjusted to the bright, natural light filtering through the glass ceiling, Dominic froze. The breath caught in his throat, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He had braced himself for tragedy. He had expected to find his gentle, innocent wife bleeding on the floor. Instead, he found a slaughterhouse, and Audrey was the butcher. The 2 massive men Maria had described, professional cartel hitters dressed in tactical gear, were dead on the white-tiled floor. One had been disarmed, his own combat knife buried to the hilt in his throat. The other lay a few feet away, a precise, singular bullet hole exactly between his eyes. The efficiency of the kills was staggering. And in the center of the room, kneeling on the shattered glass of a broken terrarium, was Genevieve Dupont. Her designer coat was torn, her face bruised, and she was bleeding profusely from a gunshot wound to her left shoulder. She was weeping, a pathetic, broken sound that Dominic had never thought the arrogant heiress capable of producing. Standing over her was Audrey. She was wearing her oversized, paint-splattered overalls and a messy bun, but the woman occupying those clothes was a stranger. Her posture was perfectly balanced, a textbook weaver stance. In her hands, she held a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP, a weapon she had seamlessly stripped from one of the dead hitters. Her grip was flawless. Her breathing was steady, measured, showing a resting heart rate that shouldn't be possible after a brutal hand-to-hand combat sequence. Audrey did not look like a terrified victim. Her eyes, usually soft and filled with warmth, were currently empty, cold, and utterly dead. They were the eyes of an apex predator looking at wounded prey. Dominic lowered his gun slightly, his mind violently rejecting the data his eyes were feeding him. Audrey, he breathed, the name tasting foreign on his tongue. Audrey's head snapped toward him. For a fraction of a second, the cold assassin vanished, and he saw a flicker of genuine sorrow cross her face. Then, the mask snapped back into place. She kept the weapon leveled at the back of Genevieve's head, but spoke to Dominic without looking at him. "You're home early, Dominic," Audrey said. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was smooth, flat, and chillingly calm. "You were supposed to be at the Calumet docks for another hour." Genevieve let out a gasping sob from the floor. "Dominic, help me. She's a demon." "Shut up, Genevieve," Audrey commanded, her tone slicing through the room like a scalpel. She pressed the hot suppressor of the pistol against Genevieve's skull, silencing the other woman instantly. Dominic took a slow step forward, his reality fracturing into a million unrecognizable pieces. The art restorer, the innocent civilian, the woman who couldn't bear to watch violent movies. "Who are you?" Dominic asked, his voice rough, betraying the seismic shock rattling his core. Audrey finally looked at him, lowering the weapon just an inch. "I told you I was in the restoration business, Dominic," she said softly, the tragic irony heavy in her words. "I just never told you what I was hired to restore." She kicked Genevieve's leg to keep her pinned. "My real name is Katerina Volkov, and I was sent to Chicago to dismantle the Rossi family from the inside." Dominic stood paralyzed among the corpses and shattered glass. The woman he had fought to protect, the woman carrying his child, was the very assassin sent to destroy him. And the worst part was, as she stared at him across the bloody room, Dominic realized he was still hopelessly in love with her. The rain pounded relentlessly against the glass ceiling of the conservatory, a chaotic percussion that mirrored the violent fracturing of Dominic Rossi's reality. He stood perfectly still, the matte black Glock still gripped loosely in his right hand. The air in the room was thick, smelling of cordite, copper, and the sweet, cloying remnants of Genevieve's perfume. Dominic's gaze shifted from the dead cartel hitters on his pristine white tiles to the woman he called his wife, Audrey, Katerina. The name echoed in his mind, jagged and unfamiliar. "The Volkov Bratva," Dominic said, his voice, a low, dangerous rumble that barely carried over the sound of the storm. "You're Nikolai Volkov's blood, the phantom niece, the one international intelligence claimed died in a Moscow car bombing 6 years ago." "I didn't die," Katerina replied, her tone analytical, entirely devoid of the warm, artistic, civilian persona she had worn for the past 2 years. She kept the suppressed Heckler and Koch leveled squarely at the back of Genevieve's skull. "I was repurposed, sent stateside. My objective was to infiltrate the Chicago outfit, locate your offshore financial ledgers, and dismantle your logistics network from the inside out. And the art gallery? The innocence? The way you looked at me when we married in Tuscany?" Dominic took a slow, deliberate step forward, the glass crunching beneath his handmade Italian leather shoes. The betrayal was a physical ache in his chest, a poison seeping into his bloodstream, but it was violently warring with an undeniable, terrifying surge of awe. The woman he had desperately tried to protect was, in fact, the most lethal entity in the room. For the first time since he had kicked the doors off their hinges, a microscopic crack appeared in Katerina's icy facade. Her grip on the pistol tightened, her knuckles turning white. The gallery was a front funded by a shell corporation handled by Arthur Sullivan, a Bratva financier. But Tuscany, she swallowed hard, her eyes briefly dropping to the floor before meeting his gaze again. The cold, dead stare of the apex predator flickered, replaced by the desperate, pleading eyes of the woman he loved. "Tuscany was real, Dominic. You have to believe me. The mission changed. Because you got caught, Genevieve spat from the floor, her voice a wet, agonizing rasp. She clutched her bleeding left shoulder, her designer coat soaked in crimson. Despite her precarious position, the Montreal heiress's innate cruelty refused to die. She craned her neck to look at Dominic, a twisted, blood-stained smile spreading across her lips. "She's playing you, Dominic. She's a parasite." My father's intelligence network intercepted a transmission from a Russian safe house in Brighton Beach. "We found out your little suburban housewife was a Bratva sleeper agent. I came here to torture the truth out of her, to expose her to you, to show you what a pathetic, blind fool you are." Genevieve let out a harsh, barking laugh that dissolved into a cough. I thought I was walking into a cage with a songbird. I didn't know the bitch had fangs. "But she's still gonna kill you, Dominic. The moment she has what she wants, she'll put a bullet in your head while you sleep." "Shut your mouth, Genevieve," Dominic commanded, his weapon snapping up, the tritium sights aligning with the center of the heiress's chest. The sight of Genevieve, the woman who had ordered firebombings and executions, bleeding on his floor brought him zero satisfaction. She was merely an obstacle now. The true threat and the true salvation stood holding the H&K. "Is she right?" Dominic asked Katerina, ignoring Genevieve entirely. He needed to know if the last 2 years of his life were an elaborate, meticulously constructed lie. He needed to know if the child she carried was a pawn or a promise. "I had access to your private safe 3 months into our marriage," Katerina said, her voice dropping to a fierce, urgent whisper. "I had the decryption keys to your Cayman accounts. I had your daily itineraries. I could have authorized a precision strike on your motorcade 100 times over. I didn't." She slowly lowered her weapon, stepping away from Genevieve, intentionally placing herself in Dominic's line of fire. It was a calculated surrender, a profound gesture of trust from a woman trained to trust no one. "Why?" Dominic asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. Katerina reached up with her free hand and pulled the messy bun loose. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that was suddenly exhausted, stripped of all pretenses. "Because I fell in love with my Mark," she confessed, her voice finally trembling. "Because the monster the Bratva told me to hunt turned out to be the only man who ever treated me like a human being. And because..." She instinctively rested her hand over her lower abdomen. "Because I will burn the Volkov Empire to the ground before I let them touch our child." The admission hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Dominic stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly, violently aligning in his mind. The subtle ways she always positioned herself facing the exits in restaurants. The martial arts books hidden behind art history texts in the library. The way she had expertly applied a tourniquet to his arm last year when he claimed it was a hunting accident. She hadn't been an innocent bystander. She had been a guardian angel, operating in the shadows. "How touching," Genevieve sneered, trying to leverage herself off the shattered glass. "A regular Romeo and Juliet, except you're both gonna rot. My men are all ready." "Your men are dead," Katerina interrupted coldly, not even glancing at her. "Your perimeter backup was neutralized before they breached the gate. The 2 you brought inside lasted exactly 14 seconds. You are entirely alone, Genevieve." Dominic lowered his Glock. The agonizing betrayal he had felt moments ago was rapidly morphing into something entirely different, a dark, possessive, and terrifyingly pragmatic alliance. He had built a fortress to protect a civilian. Now, he realized he didn't need a civilian. He needed a queen who knew how to wage war. "What do we do with her?" Katerina asked, deferring to Dominic, acknowledging his territory. Dominic looked at Genevieve. Letting her live meant the Montreal Syndicate would mobilize. It meant a prolonged, bloody war stretching from the Canadian border to the south side of Chicago. But killing her here, in his home, meant crossing a line that the Commission would struggle to overlook. "She knows who you are," Dominic said quietly. "If Montreal knows, it's only a matter of time before the outfit finds out. My underboss, Lorenzo, is already on edge. If my men discover I've been sleeping with a Bratva assassin, there will be a mutiny by midnight. Then we clean it up," Katerina said smoothly, her eyes hardening once more. "We make it look like a cartel retaliation. Montreal has enemies in Juarez. We strip the bodies, use untraceable incendiaries, and burn the conservatory." Dominic couldn't help the dark, humorless smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You've thought about this." "I'm a professional, Dominic," she replied, stepping over the dead hitter and closing the distance between them. She reached out, her paint-stained fingers gently touching the lapel of his soaked suit. "And right now, my only contract is keeping our family alive." Dominic reached up, his large hand wrapping around hers, the warmth of her skin grounding him in the chaotic aftermath. He pulled her flush against his chest, uncaring of the blood and rain. He kissed her a hard, bruising, desperate collision of teeth and lips that tasted of adrenaline and survival. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, a silent vow sealed in the wreckage of their former lives. "Hey!" Genevieve shrieked, her voice cracking with panic as the reality of her situation finally settled in. "You can't do this! My father will level this city! He will—" Dominic pulled back from Katerina, his eyes dark and resolute. He raised his Glock, aiming without looking. "I'll send him the ashes," Dominic said. The suppressed gunshot was nothing more than a sharp crack, swallowed by the thunder outside. Genevieve DuPont collapsed backward onto the ruined tiles, finally silent. The scent of accelerant was sharp and chemical, overpowering the lingering metallic tang of blood. Dominic stood by the shattered remnants of the conservatory doors, watching as Katerina moved with terrifying efficiency. She was systematically wiping down surfaces, establishing a perimeter of fast-burning thermite strips around the bodies of the cartel hitters and the Montreal heiress. Watching her work was a surreal, hypnotic experience. The woman he had believed would faint at the sight of a paper cut was currently orchestrating a forensic countermeasure that rivaled the outfit's best cleaners. Dominic's encrypted phone vibrated against his ribs. He pulled it out, glancing at the caller ID. Lorenzo Costa. Dominic's jaw tightened. Lorenzo had been his underboss for 5 years, a ruthless tactician who had helped Dominic secure the Calumet shipping lanes. But Lorenzo was also a traditionalist, a man who believed the outfit's bloodlines should remain pure. If Lorenzo caught even a whisper of Katerina's true surname, he would initiate a coup before the sun rose. Dominic answered, his voice returning to the smooth, authoritative cadence of the Chicago boss. "Speak." "Boss?" Lorenzo's voice was tense, the background noise indicating he was in a moving vehicle. "We locked down the O'Bannon situation, but I got a call from Wyatt's secondary comms. The gatehouse at Astor Street is dark. I'm 10 minutes out with the sweep team. What's your status?" Dominic looked at Katerina. She paused, a thermite strip in hand, her dark eyes locking onto his, reading the shift in his posture. "Hold your position, Lorenzo," Dominic ordered, his tone brooking no argument. The estate was hit. Montreal. Genevieve DuPont orchestrated a breach. A heavy silence fell over the line. "Genevieve? Jesus Christ. Is Audrey. Audrey is safe." Dominic lied seamlessly. "My internal security handled the threat. Genevieve and her hitters are dead. I'm isolating the incident." "Boss, you need a cleanup crew. You need me there," Lorenzo insisted, his voice pitching higher. "If Montreal moved on your home, we have to retaliate tonight. We need to lock down the city." "I said hold your position," Dominic repeated, his voice dropping an octave, radiating lethal intent. "I am managing the scene. You will take the sweep team back to the Southside warehouse. Secure the perimeter there. Wait for my call. Am I understood?" There was a pregnant pause. The hesitation was minor, but to Dominic, who had survived by reading the spaces between words, it was deafening. "Understood, boss," Lorenzo finally said. The line clicked dead. Dominic lowered the phone, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He hesitated, Katerina stated quietly, having heard only Dominic's side of the conversation. She walked over to him, wiping a smear of soot from her cheek. "He did," Dominic agreed, his eyes narrowing. Lorenzo doesn't hesitate. He executes orders. Katerina leaned against the doorframe, her mind racing, calculating probabilities with a speed that made Dominic simultaneously proud and terrified. Genevieve said her father's intelligence network intercepted a transmission from a Bratva safe house. Katerina reasoned, her voice rapid and precise. But the Montreal syndicate doesn't have the decryption algorithms for Bratva secure channels, not even close. Someone had to hand them that intel. Dominic's blood ran cold. The implications were catastrophic. Someone acting as a broker. Someone who wanted Genevieve to do the dirty work of exposing you, causing chaos in my house, leaving me vulnerable. "Lorenzo," they said in unison. "He wants the seat," Dominic said, dragging a hand over his face, the exhaustion of the night finally threatening to crash over him. He knew Montreal was pushing the boundaries. "If Genevieve killed you, I would wage a blind, emotional war against Canada. The commission would view me as unstable, a liability." Lorenzo steps in, plays the voice of reason, and the commission hands him my empire. "And if he knew I was Bratva," Katerina added, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. He tipped off Genevieve, hoping we would kill each other. Either way, Lorenzo wins. Not anymore, Dominic said softly. We can't stay here, Katerina said, her tactical mindset taking total control. The thermite will erase the forensic evidence of who killed them, but the fire department will be here in 10 minutes once I ignite it. If Lorenzo is orchestrating a coup, he won't wait for the Southside secure order. He's coming here now, and he's bringing men loyal to him, not you. Dominic nodded, stepping into the hallway. The safe house in Lake Forest? It's off the books. Only Wyatt knew about it, and Wyatt is... Dominic paused, a flash of genuine grief hitting him for his fallen head of security. Wyatt will survive, Katerina said gently, squeezing his arm. I checked his pulse before you walked in. The dart was laced with a synthetic opioid, not a lethal neurotoxin. He'll be unconscious for 12 hours, but his vitals are stable. Dominic looked at her, entirely bewildered by the depth of her layered operations. You checked my security detail? I protect what is mine, Dominic, she said simply, a fiercely territorial edge to her voice. Now, help me set the detonators. We have exactly 4 minutes before Lorenzo's sweep team breaches the front gates. They move together, a macabre, synchronized dance of destruction. They armed the incendiary devices, leaving a trail of chemical destruction that would consume the corpses and the evidence of Katerina's lethal proficiency. Dominic grabbed a heavily armored tactical go-bag from the hidden compartment in his study, loading it with passports, burner phones, and $250,000 in untraceable cash. He tossed a spare Glock 19 to Katerina. She caught it out of the air, expertly checking the chamber and dropping the magazine to verify the load before sliding it into the waistband of her overalls. Ready? Dominic asked, standing by the hidden service elevator that led to the subterranean garage. Katerina pulled a remote detonator from her pocket. She looked back at the grand, opulent hallway of the Astor Street estate, the home where she had painted landscapes, baked bread, and pretended to be a fragile bird in a golden cage. Goodbye, Audrey, Katerina whispered. She pressed the button. A muted, deep whump echoed from the back of the house, followed instantly by the roar of unnatural, white-hot flames. The fire alarms began to scream, a shrill, deafening klaxon that signaled the end of Dominic Rossi's reign and the birth of something entirely new. They stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut just as the smell of smoke reached them. They descended into the subterranean darkness, heading toward a reinforced SUV. They were no longer the boss and the civilian. They were two phantoms in the machine, betrayed by their own empires, armed to the teeth, and completely reliant on a love forged in blood and deception. As the heavy garage doors rolled up, revealing the stormy Chicago night, Dominic slammed his foot on the accelerator. They had to disappear. They had to regroup. Because tomorrow, they were going to hunt Lorenzo Costa, and they were going to tear the Chicago outfit apart, piece by piece. The armored SUV tore through the rain-slicked streets, leaving the burning Astor Street estate in its rearview mirror. Dominic and Katerina didn't speak as they navigated the desolate stretch of Interstate 94 toward the Lake Forest safe house. The silence wasn't born of distance, but of profound, shared calculation. Inside the sparse, subterranean concrete bunker in Lake Forest, Katerina dropped the tactical bag onto a steel table. She stripped off her blood-soaked overalls, revealing a simple black tank top and tactical trousers underneath. Dominic watched her, the visceral shock of her true identity fading into a dark, intoxicating awe. Lorenzo will consolidate power tonight, Dominic said, loading a fresh magazine into his Glock 19. He'll tell the commission, I perished in the fire, a victim of Montreal's overreach. By dawn, he'll be the undisputed head of the Chicago outfit. Katerina pulled a heavily modified Remington 700 SPS tactical rifle from a weapon rack, checking the optics. Then we don't let him see the dawn, she said, her voice a chilling whisper of Bratva ice. If we run now, both the outfit and my uncle's syndicate will hunt us until the end of our days. We have to sever the head of the snake and make them believe the venom killed us both. Dominic nodded, stepping closer to her. The Calumet warehouse. He'll be there, securing the narcotics shipments to prove his immediate value to the Capos. 2 hours later, the rain had slowed to a miserable drizzle. The Calumet River warehouse was swarming with Lorenzo's loyalists. Dominic and Katerina moved through the shadows of the rusted shipping containers like wraiths. They were a terrifying symphony of violence, the raw, brute authority of the Chicago mob, perfectly synced with the surgical, phantom precision of Russian intelligence. Katerina scaled the rusted fire escape of an adjacent silo, finding her vantage point. Through her thermal scope, she tracked the perimeter guards. Target acquired. Dominic walked straight toward the heavy steel doors of the warehouse, his hands empty, projecting the absolute arrogance of a king who refused to be dethroned. The two guards at the door raised their weapons, but before a single syllable could be uttered, two suppressed rounds from Katerina's Remington dropped them silently to the wet asphalt. Dominic stepped over the bodies and pushed the doors open. Inside, Lorenzo Costa stood over the aluminum table, surrounded by a dozen armed men. He was mid-sentence, barking orders about securing Albanon's supply lines, when the heavy doors echoed shut. Lorenzo spun around, the color draining from his face as he laid eyes on Dominic Rossi. "Dominic," Lorenzo stammered, stepping back. We thought Montreal burned you alive." "You hoped they did, Lorenzo." Dominic corrected, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't need to. You sold my encrypted channels to Genevieve Dupont. You tried to hand my family over to the slaughter just to sit in my chair." Lorenzo's shock morphed into a snarling panic. He realized Dominic was alone, or so he thought. "Kill him!" Lorenzo screamed at his men, drawing his own sidearm. Chaos erupted, but the Reaper had already claimed the room. The high-caliber glass of the warehouse skylight shattered as Katerina provided devastating overwatch. 3 of Lorenzo's men dropped before they could even aim, their chests blooming with crimson. Panic seized the remaining soldiers as invisible death rained down from the rafters. Dominic drew his Glock, moving with lethal fluidity. He advanced through the confusion, executing 2 men who tried to flank him. Within 30 seconds, the warehouse was a graveyard. Only Lorenzo remained, bleeding from a shattered kneecap, courtesy of Katerina's rifle. Dominic stood over his former underboss, his eyes devoid of mercy. "You're a dead man, Rossi," Lorenzo gasped, clutching his ruined leg. "The Commission, the Russians, they'll tear the world apart looking for you." "Let them look," Dominic whispered. He raised his weapon and pulled the trigger. Dominic and Katerina spent the next hour rigging the warehouse with the same military-grade thermite used at the estate. They planted carefully curated evidence, Bratva shell casings, outfit ledgers, and enough biological material to convince the coroners that Dominic Rossi and a top-tier Russian operative had killed each other in a fiery, apocalyptic shootout. As the warehouse erupted into a towering inferno against the Chicago skyline, Dominic and Katerina stood by the riverbank. He pulled her close, her head resting against his chest as the heat of the flames washed over them, their old lives burning away to make room for the new one. In the end, the blood spilled on Astor Street was only the beginning. Dominic and Audrey Katerina realized that their survival depended not on their syndicates, but on each other. They burned their empires to the ground, leaving Chicago behind in a trail of ash and shattered alliances. They traded crowns of violence for a quiet life in anonymity, proving that even in a world built on ruthless deception, a fiercely protective love could rewrite the ultimate fate of 2 assassins.